Hi, Gabor. How are you?
Hey, Steve. Good, good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much. We're going to have a nice chat today about Tether and like what's going on in El Salvador. I'm quite excited, actually. And I would like to first like to know, like the audience would like to know who you are and what you do, what you're doing for the ecosystem and that. So first of all, if you just let us know about yourself, that would be really appreciated.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. And it's really exciting to be sort of on a Turkish show. I grew up in a town that was a Turkish and Hungarian town. I'm Hungarian by origin. And so my town was half Turkish. And there's a lot of Turkish culture over there. So maybe as this is the first part of the introduction, they always shared a lot of things with, the Turkish culture. And so good to be here. I am, as you know, Steve, I'm the Director of Digital Asset Strategy at VanEck and the founder of Pointsful. So VanEck is an $85 billion asset manager known to bring to market some of the more innovative funds, like around Bitcoin. We have 6 different funds in Europe in Bitcoin. We have built the first gold fund when in the 60s when gold became illegal. So and so there was a government struggle before gold became a $12 trillion asset. So my background is helping to build institutionally accessible products that are regulated and kind of fit into also government regulation and build access to institutions.
And you're the pioneer, like one of the pioneers in crypto investments as well, right?
Yeah, I because of my Hungarian background, I was helping a group of graph theory students who introduced me to Bitcoin mining in 2011. So it was interesting to me, and the technology of creating non-sovereign money is important. And my culture in Hungary has experienced the largest hyperinflationary event in history, and we added 29 zeros to the currency. And so, hyperinflation is something that I think about a lot, and that's going on in Turkey as well. So the technology that helps prevent those scenarios is here. And
you said it would double in every 18 hours or something?
Yeah, I think for a period of time, it double every 18 hours. And you can buy a chicken or a carton of eggs with a wheelbarrow of Hungarian currency, which was the pango before they introduced the foreign. So it's just, hyperinflation is real, and you guys actually are living in an era where currency is inflating, 58%.
Yeah, there's many reasons for this. Like, it's been years now, the production side, Turkey's a massive country, a huge country. The production side is lower than before. The import is extended to a level where we can't even believe, because we were one of the self-sufficient countries, one of the 7 self-sufficient countries in the world. Now we're like importing some seeds as well. So which I can't get my head around it. But I mean, I don't like talking politics, I mean, it's not my place to comment about this, but the inflation rate and, dollar against Turkish lira and everything, we're not going through a very shiny period, let's say it that way.
Of course.
But someone is, which is El Salvador. So El Salvador. So, I mean, everyone's talking about this El Salvador thing and how they're like changing. I think it's revolutionary, to be honest, like to turn the whole country. And the other day, Samsung was there. He had a video buying a coffee from Starbucks with his Bitcoin. And I think it's great for us, for the crypto community, and for the future of the industry and the ecosystem. But I'm curious, and I'm really excited about what's your look on El Salvador? Like, how do you think they're going to, build this, and is it going to be 100% success, or is there any downfalls in the, in the system? How do you look at it, Gabor?
Yeah, I think what El Salvador is doing is amazing. So first of all, they want to basically go away from fiat currencies and try Bitcoin on a national level. So obviously them being the first country is sort of, it's difficult. It's an experiment. There are a lot of pushback and things can go wrong. However, they are systematically building out the payment systems. I think they built out the payment system nicely, so there's good adoption even in the early days. I can't remember, something like 50–60% of people already are using the app, and you know, they have as much access to Bitcoin as the dollar. So I think that, you know, that's amazing. So one level is payment. A secondary level is debt and sort of like external affairs, and how do you use a currency to sustain an economy. And what they're doing with their bond offering is interesting to me, because they're effectively raising capital to replace external debt in the form of Bitcoin, which they believe is a hard form of money. So I think that kind of the effort to replace external capital and the dollar as a currency is interesting. And there's going to be a lot of investment going into El Salvador because of their efforts to raise a Bitcoin bond. What I would add to that too is, you know, I believe that, you know, that the El Salvador bond is oversubscribed. They could probably bring in $5 to $10 billion fairly easily.
Because it was 1 billion, wasn't it? It was a 1 billion bond.
Yeah, I think this is one bond, but you know, my belief is they could probably do 5–10 billion pretty easily, just from the crypto community. I also think that, you know, as an institutional investor, I'm looking at this bond, and you know, larger institutions that are bond investors are also looking. So that's why I think the 10 billion range is not unreasonable over the next few years.
Not at all. I mean, I know some whales that are like really interested in it as well in the market, like $20 million, $50 million. Like everyone's, it's 6.5%, right, yearly. I'm not mistaken. Am I 6.5%?
Yeah, that's correct. And you know, that's not a big number from an interest perspective. What's more interesting to me is that after 5 years, you get some percent of the Bitcoin proceeds. So you're both playing and investing in El Salvador and their economy transitioning into a Bitcoin economy, as well as making a bet on Bitcoin over the next 5 years. So that's an interesting sort of idea.
How does it, Gabor? Everyone's asking this question. I mean, I know you know, but people are curious. Like, because the volatility of Bitcoin, how does the payment system work? Is it like one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, and whatever the fraction is, like you buy bread, for example, or a coffee, how do you manage the price to stay stable when Bitcoin is very volatile?
Yeah, so like for purchases, the simple answer is like you deal with the volatility, and over time, Bitcoin is designed to appreciate, and so you basically your monetary basis appreciates over time. But the intraday volatility is definitely something that I think is an issue. Practically on the payment side, when you buy a cup of coffee, there's a few minute fixings where you can get a guaranteed rate for your Bitcoin, but you know the prices of items fluctuate by the day. And I think that, you know, intraday fluctuation actually better reflects reality, because the reality is that fiat currencies fluctuate against each other during the day. So, you know, the Turkish lira versus the dollar, or the euro versus the dollar, there's an intraday rate, and that being expressed in the form of payments better reflects reality, which I think is actually helpful to react to potentially negative like economic scenarios. You recognize it earlier. And I think that that's a good thing.
So it's a system that you think is going to work 100%, I suppose.
I think so. They are, you know, this is of course, this is an experiment, and El Salvador is the first country, but I think it is, you know, in many ways, the Bitcoin payment rails are more efficient and decades ahead of the fiat payment railways, which is kind of interesting. You know, like I think one of the things that is necessary for fiat currencies like the dollar or the euro and major currencies is to upgrade the railways to make them better. And I think that's what stable coins do well. Yeah.
I mean, today it was announced, I think, was it today or yesterday? Myanmar, that's an Asian country. They are, the currency, they're changing their currency into Tether, USD Tether. So, I mean, whoever's having like economical problem, like financial problems, I think they're going, they're seeing this as like a light at the end of the tunnel, that this can fix it. So, I mean, I know what, you know, Bitfinex and Tether and what they're doing, how they're contributing to, you know, El Salvador. You know, I see what Samsung is doing. I'm always in touch with Paolo. And how do you see the exchanges and, you know, like Tether, like a stable coin, supporting El Salvador like this. Obviously, it's an investment for them also. So how is it going? What do you think? Like Bitfinex, what have they actually done for El Salvador?
Yeah. So a few things. So I think just to start with, I think the United States dollar and Bitcoin are two of the greatest assets in the world. One of them is the US dollar actually gave rise to the West and the developments in the past 100 years, really. So it's a great asset and a lot of supporting it. Bitcoin is a new asset. It's a 12-year-old asset, roughly, and it's a different monetary policy. But the combination of those two, I think, can help countries. So, El Salvador went straight to Bitcoin. El Salvador was a dollarized economy, and they said, well, we'll take dollars. So we'll keep our dollars, but we'll also introduce Bitcoin as an official currency. So they're using this mix to achieve basically economic prosperity. With respect to Myanmar, they are not. I think they're not as ready to jump on the Bitcoin train as El Salvador, and they are not technologically and from a government perspective not as developed. So for them, actually, it's easier to jump to a fiat currency railway like the dollar and through Tether, like a stable coin. So that's interesting to me because their approach is we're going to use an established currency like the dollar, right, to fight off inflation, to attract investment. And actually, that's a great approach. A lot of economies over time got dollarized and adopted the dollar because compared to their local currencies, the dollar does not depreciate as quickly. So like, in Turkey, if you had, well, it's probably impractical right now, but may not be impractical, soon. If Turkey adopted Tether and people had ready access to the dollar, then you could actually maintain purchasing power very efficiently. So that's what Myanmar is doing. And what I usually like to say, it starts with El Salvador, it starts with Myanmar, but I expect that next few years we'll see a G20 country or a large country with a large population.
That's a big statement. I mean, I hope so, and I would like Turkey to adopt the whole technology first, like the mining side. See, our right next door neighbors, like Bulgaria, years ago they confiscated some Bitcoin from people who were using it illegally. So, but they didn't sell; they just put it in their reserves, and they have now the Bulgaria has 230,000 Bitcoins, right? So their economy was really bad. I'm not depending this on just, the Bitcoin assets they have, or I'm not, they're part of European Union. They work with euros and that. But years ago, I remember we used to go to Bulgaria to do shopping because it was cheap compared to the Turkish lira. Right now, it's the opposite. The border is rammed with Bulgarians trying to come on this side to do their daily shoppings, and they go back. So
amazing. In just a few years, right?
Yeah, I mean now it's like 8 or 9 liras to a leva, which is like for us. If you told this to us like 10 years ago, we'd be like, yeah, stop joking. It's not going to happen because Bulgaria, I mean, Turkey's massive. We're huge, and maybe because of this, whoever gets the technology first. Whoever adopts and adapts to it, they develop rapidly. So I think Turkey, like El Salvador, this is one interesting thing I would like to ask you. So El Salvador is like using volcanic power, right, to mine Bitcoin. Yeah. So Turkey, the lands of Turkey and the sun, we have so many like energy options to actually do Bitcoin mining. So do you think a big company or like do you think anyone's interested in coming to Turkey and invest in Turkey and with solar power, maybe mining in Turkey? Obviously, the government has to, they have to have an agreement with the government. But is there any like offers at least made? Like, El Salvador had this opportunity and they took it and they're taking their country to the next level right now.
Yeah.
So what do you think about, because Turkish spectators are like, Turkish people are very curious about on what point are we going to jump on the train of this new technology?
Yeah. So to me, like particularly just the current day issues with inflation in Turkey and the lira and sort of my background and growing up with a Hungarian and Turkish town, I actually look at Turkey very closely. And you know, it is right now maybe at a big scale like Turkey. It's not the same adopting Bitcoin in Turkey as El Salvador, as you mentioned. And the cool thing about stable coins and Bitcoin is the following. You actually don't need the crazy infrastructure to adopt them. So like, you know, there's a company like Tether, or there are some, you know, Bitcoin exchanges like Bitfinex you mentioned earlier. If they were to, you know, come to Turkey and support on a bigger scale, then you'd be able to adopt Bitcoin from the grassroots level. So people can just buy Bitcoin. People can buy stable coins, and some of them might be regulated eventually by governments. But today, like without building the crazy infrastructure, you could actually access, you know, a form of the dollar in a stablecoin format and Bitcoin. So to me, this is like living. My parents lived through and grandparents the Holocaust and communism and, you know, confiscation of all sorts. This is all after the crazy hyperinflationary period. The fact that you can access, you know, these assets without needing permission from the government is really interesting. And in fact, like the governments should think about accessing these assets and doing a deal with some of these exchanges. I talk to a lot of governments and institutions, and they're thinking about it because they don't want their economy to collapse. And many fiat economies are having issues controlling inflations, and their models are failing. And stablecoins and Bitcoin are introducing a new model that might save economies. And so that I think it's interesting that today people can actually save themselves. and so I recommend that, just not to wait around for the government to potentially save you, because the government will catch up with technology eventually.
I know they will catch up, but first of all, I think they need to understand the technology, not to be stubborn about it. You know, this is the key. They need to like say, okay, this is the new thing. Let's, you know, you're thinking about dollars, and you know, in Turkey, obviously, dollars are like an asset now. It's like an investment right now, so because we're losing so much money. But in Turkey, to adopt this, okay, if there was a conservative way, if fiat money was conservative, and you know, let's say you have $10 billion or something, and you don't print any more money, you don't make any more money, that would be fine. But it's not. So Turkey is the same. When you're like in, you know, when you're in a really bad situation, like, okay, we need money, let's, you know, print more money. Bitcoin's not like that. This is the idea they can't get around. You know, Bitcoin, you know, the supply is 21 million. That's it. So whoever holds the most in the future with this technology, whoever jumps on the train first, they're going to be, you know, the powerful country. So as you said, you mentioned, you're very, you know, you frequently, you know, talk with institutions and like governments and that. How do you think, well, what's your perspective? Like, what are they looking at Tether as? Like, do they see Tether as a solution? Like how they can solve their problems? Or are they still a bit conservative? Like, are they still, no, I don't want to, you know, I don't believe in this technology? Or what are their reactions?
This is actually a really interesting question. So from the media, you see all these concerns around stable coins, like in general, like Tether or USDC, they're new technology. So as you mentioned too, people are initially afraid of new technology. So you're trying to find issues with it. However, when you talk with, you know, governments or institutions and work with them, all they want is to upgrade their technology to the latest and make sure that their people are okay. And you know, Tether is so successful and sort of stable coins in general that it created a blueprint literally for central banks to build digital currencies. It created a blueprint for corporations to use and build digital currencies. So I wouldn't be surprised, you know, like the example of Myanmar, if we saw other countries, bigger institutions just use Tether as a stable coin. And what it is a proxy like the Eurodollars to the dollar space. So effectively, your bet is that with a part of your assets, you're investing in the idea that the U.S. central bank and the sort of like the Western sphere is going to be able to maintain the value of the dollar a little bit better than some local currency. So it's not an unreasonable bet with a small amount of money to make, like especially when things go downhill. If you have access to these railways, I think that's interesting to me. And to your point again, like when you talk with actual decision makers from governments and institutions, they're actually looking at Tether and technology very positively. I think some of the discussions around like how do we create rules and laws around the space is happening right now. But I actually just wanted to say I think it's better. The actual perception of stable coins is much better among decision makers than what it might seem from the media. So that's
because I get to do, like, I've got with all my accounts on Twitter, my main account is nearly 500,000 followers. So I do surveys. So I asked the other day, I said, okay, so you got an asset, you got money, right? Where do you think you should save your money? Dollars in a bank, USDT, USDC, or BUSD, Binance's USD. 81% said USDT and stable coins. So instead of people actually having dollars and saving in the bank, they prefer to save it as a USD Tether. This was very interesting for me because obviously my followers are like more of on our side, they're cryptocurrency lovers, they're investors, they follow the news and what's going on. They're more like an open-minded crowd. But to see that outcome tells me that the people already trust the system. The people already are willing to invest in cryptocurrency and stable coins. So it's only a matter of time that the governments will as well. This is my opinion. Or if they don't, they will have to. Because if everyone else is, then you're going to have to. But then the timing is important. If you're one of the latest ones to like join, it's a bit like Bitcoin. You bought Bitcoin in 2011, 2012, 2013. And now the people are buying Bitcoin saying from when it goes down from 69 to 45, they're like, oh no, the market is crashing. No, it's not. You went on the train really late. You could have been one of the ones that bought it for $50 or $10 or even $1,000 or whatever. So the timing is important for the governments. I think it's vital that there should, every developed country, Western country at least, should have in the municipality, they should have people who just deals with the cryptocurrency side, and they can advise their presidents or they can advise their economy ministers in that. I think this is the future. That's why we're talking here. You obviously you're the pioneers. Like you're 2007, man. We weren't even talking about cryptocurrency. So what do you see? Like this is like a personal question, right? So in the next 5 years with the world, all this pandemic happened and it's still going on with the Omicron and everything. The next 5 years, what do you think is going to be in the finance world? Globally, do you think the majority is going to go this way to cryptocurrencies and see the light and see maybe there's a global thing going on and we can make the economy better in the world? Or do you think it's going to, some people say, it's going to be like the infrastructure, the system is not ready, the people don't know about it. First, you need to educate the people. What's your opinion? I'm very curious.
So, first, I just wanted to say to your point, the perception of Tether in your poll, and I think it's the just if you look at the success of the asset, it's something like $75 billion today. That speaks for itself. So companies, individuals, governments are adopting it because it's successful and it stood the test of time. So I think that speaks for itself, and people will continue to use the asset Tether because it has stood the test of time, and that's one of the most important characteristics of it.
Especially with all these FUDs going on and everything, they push everything aside.
And it's the dollar, it's the dollar too. It is not, for a lot of governments and corporations, they are going to the dollar and being able to access it in a way is much easier than buying Bitcoin. So before, a lot of companies, before they make the leap into Bitcoin and sort of governments too, they might go into a digitized form of the dollar like Tether. So, I just wanted to say that. And I think, to your question of what's the next 5 years and what trends will drive, that's going to be one of the trends. I think something like 6 out of 10 central banks announced that they're going to launch a digital currency. I I think corporations and banks will adopt existing currencies like Tether because there is an economy of scale advantage when you have 75 billion at fast-growing asset base and integrations into multiple blockchains and exchanges that allows you to access your asset readily, which is actually at a time of crisis is really important because if currency drops 50% or some railways is being cut off, you're still able to access assets. So I think that's that's going to grow, and companies and governments will realize that, and so they will. I think we'll see more.
Germany, Gabor, I read about Germany. 3 banks in Germany is adopting, and another in Switzerland. There's this like online payment systems that is like adopting now stablecoin like Tether and cryptocurrency. So it's going like your theory of like one of the G20 is going to go into this. It gets stronger and stronger by the day, actually.
Yeah, and today, like the banks and corporations are already in G20 countries are using Tether and Bitcoin as some form of either store of value or payment. And it's very simple. It's faster, cheaper, more reliable. That's the story that has driven currencies and innovations over time. And the financial and payment system has been monopolized by some players who are charging extraordinary fees, and that's being disintermediated and disrupted. That's simple, and blockchains have actually brought scale to it. So I think that will open up to like more people, for instance, in Turkey too. Yeah.
I call it the internet money, the new money, the internet money, because everyone now how the consumption speed, especially the youth and that, with all these like smartphones and that coming into our lives and everything, everyone's very impatient and that. So if I want to send, let's say, $5 to you, Gabor, like from here, I could just send it. But if you go through like the the traditional methods to send $5 to someone, it's going to take, especially to another country, it's going to be like where with Bitcoin and that. The Lightning Network and the remittance fees are like nowhere compared to like Western Union. Right. So I think the next generation doesn't even care about the old systems. Everyone's using these methods to like actually. This is going to catch up. I have no doubt. The only thing about Turkish people was when I said when I was talking about Tether, they were saying, oh, that's a Ponzi, Tether. I was like, what? What are you talking about? Oh, because they got, someone said there's FUDs in this. Look, I can sue you 5 times on the same subject. It doesn't make sense. Or when you're guilt-free from that, then another 5 people can do it. It doesn't mean anything. This is what I'm trying to explain to people. There's a solid, rock-solid system and infrastructure here. And it's been going on for years and years. I'm talking about Tether stablecoin. Yeah. For years and years. I believe in it. I trust it. So.
Yeah. No, look, like, banks have, this is interesting. I think this is just business as usual. So many of the largest banks are getting sued every day. And, they pay fines for all kinds of things and that happens with innovative technologies, new types of products. So HSBC is around, Citibank is around, all the big banks are around, despite the fact that they had people suing them or questioning their products. It's just people trying to do business with each other at an unseen scale. So I think that's what I would take away. The media is playing up this type of FUD and sort of like, oh, what are the problems with stablecoins? And it's looking at the wrong thing. The thing to look at is central banks are trying to adopt this technology, countries, governments, corporations, to actually serve people, to make the payment experience better, and to serve the youngest generation who is digital native. If you look at the distribution of the population, 2/3 of the population of the world is under 39 years of age. So actually, it's about like 64%. Wow. 33% of people are under 30 years of age. 50% of all transactions today are done from an online wallet, and only I think something like 30% is credit card, and another 15% is debit card and very minimal cash. So clearly, the pathway and sort of the era of innovation is going towards online wallets. So it is going to be Bitcoin and stable coins who are winning out, because one, Bitcoin is good money, and then stable coins are efficient forms of good enough money like the dollar. And so I think the trust question is, like, to me, Tether stood the test of time, Bitcoin stood the test of time, and again, all the other organizations are scrambling to adopt it. So I expect more adoption. And the other thing, like, that people don't think about it a lot, that, you know, actually the likes of like Tether and stablecoins, they don't compete with governments. They compete with payment providers. So they are literally, like, they're competing with Visa, PayPal, Western Union, and companies that are taking a large percentage of money out of transactions and out of working people's budgets. And I remember, you know, traveling in Europe, or I'm not going to quote an airport where the FX rates are, you know, you get charged 10, 15% and you can't buy anything, just, you know, exchanging money. But I traveled in Central Eastern Europe, and, you know, routinely when I go to a hotel, you end up getting charged anywhere between 4 to 10% on just credit card and conversion fees. Yeah. And that is, you know, that is a scam. I think that is a scam when technology exists to pay a few basis points or a few 10 basis points. Sure. So if you make transactions an order of magnitude better and practical for people, then you're actually keeping those amount of that money into people's and hardworking people's budgets and pockets. So, you know, that is the perspective that should be in the media more often, in my opinion.
Do you think, Gabor, also the government's see this as a threat, where I don't think it's a threat to fiat money. I think it's more of a value, an asset, a digital asset. So if you're going to invest in something, it can be bonds, gold, you know, anything, houses, lands, anything. Now people are choosing, instead of buying a house, he says, I'm going to invest in Bitcoin, because when I buy a house, there's all these, like, you know, maintenance fees. And when I want to sell it, I've got to pay, like, you know, tax on it. And, you know, it has to be valued. And if I want to sell it, am I going to sell it? How long is it going to take me to sell it? And when the money comes to the bank, blah, 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 blah. Where with Bitcoin, I can sell my Bitcoin to you now as we speak. There's no, like, I can sell it to anywhere in the world. So I don't think it should be a threat to the fiat money. It's more of it, like, if the government see it this way, it's an asset. It's a digital asset. It's like what gold was, but gold is not like Bitcoin, because Bitcoin can last without, you know, it will break all the inflation, whatever, and 100 years later, you'll still have the value of Bitcoin. Where it's not the same with gold or property or anything else with money. So I think this is the future. I'm so happy that we're on the same page. I mean, you've been in the game a lot longer than I have, and your contribution, I mean, I know you, obviously, that after this interview, people will, you know, look into your career and what you did for the ecosystem. First of all, I would like to thank you for joining and having a chat with me about this very important, you know, subject, which is, I think, all the financial world globally is talking about this right now. And I think the talks was from being, oh, you know, cryptocurrency, to how do we adopt, how do we, you know, put the cryptocurrency within our systems. So that's a good development. The more people talk about it, the more governments talk about it, the more, like, centralized banks talk about it, the better. And we're going to be happy in the future for being the first ones on the train.
Yeah, it's always difficult to be the first, right? You know, you get criticized and ridiculed, but eventually, you know, things that are worthwhile technologies get adopted. And again, thanks for having me. Thank you for all the great work that you do in Turkey and globally. I think, like, again, just to on particularly like a country in like Turkey, it's so important to have access to these technologies from a grassroots level. And I think, again, as time goes forward, I have firm belief that governments and larger corporations recognize that you know, Bitcoin and stablecoins like Tether, they're more partners helping to actually make the world better. So again, I appreciate that you bring this message too, because the media usually tries to get clicks through outrage, but I think the capacity to make a change and make things better for everyday people and working people through this technology is immense. And so thank you for telling that story and bringing guests to your show.
Thank you so much. I think the Turkish audience is going to get so much out of this as a, you know, experienced person, like a valuable person in this ecosystem. Thank you so much again. I just want to say, I don't want people to be prejudiced towards this cryptocurrency anymore. And people like yourself and, you know, my previous guests and everything, we were always on the same level. I really appreciate your time and all the knowledge you shared with us. Thank you so much, Gabor.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Bye.